The night was heavy with a thick fog, wrapping the neighborhood in a quiet stillness, the kind of stillness that only comes with the hours between dusk and dawn. Sarah Thompson, a quiet teenager, always found peace in these hours. It was when the world slowed down, the bustle of her busy life subsiding, and she could just sit in her room with her German Shepherd Max, curled up by her feet. The house was old, the wood creaking occasionally, but to Sarah, it felt safe. Max had been with her since she was a little girl, a constant companion in her world that was sometimes too big, too noisy, too much. Max was more than a dog. He was her protector, her confidant, the one who kept her company when the world seemed too cold. But tonight, the peace was broken. It wasn't the sound of the wind or an animal stirring outside. It was the sharp crack of gunfire. Max's high-pitched yelp sliced through the air, a noise full of terror and pain. Sarah's heart stopped. She didn't need to see him to know that something was wrong. She bolted out of her room and down the narrow hallway, the wooden floor creaking under her feet. By the time she reached the front door, she could already hear the sirens, the wail of police cars in the distance, growing louder by the second. And then she saw him. Max was on the ground, his body racked with pain. He was barely breathing, his once sharp eyes dull, looking up at her with a mixture of confusion and fear. He had been shot. "Max!" Sarah cried, dropping to her knees beside him, her hands trembling as she tried to steady him. Her heart raced in her chest. This couldn't be happening. Max was not a threat. He never had been. He was a gentle giant, always protective but never aggressive. Yet here he was, lying motionless in front of her. The flashing lights from the police cars illuminated the dark street, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. Two police officers stood at the end of the driveway, guns still drawn, watching her. Sarah's breath hitched. She couldn't make sense of it. They were supposed to protect people, not kill them, especially not her dog. "Ma'am." "Step away from the dog," one of the officers called. His voice firm but unsteady, like he was questioning his own actions. "No." "You don't understand. He didn't do anything wrong." Sarah screamed, tears streaming down her face. She reached out to Max, but the officer's voice grew louder. "Ma'am, I said step away from the dog. He's a danger!" Sarah could hardly hear him. Her mind was clouded with panic. Why had they shot him? Max was just standing there, barking like he always did when someone approached the house. He wasn't a threat. He was a dog. He didn't deserve this. "Max." "Please, don't leave me," Sarah whispered, her voice choked with sobs as she cradled his head in her lap. His breathing was shallow, but it was there. For a moment, Sarah thought he might be okay. Maybe he was just hurt, maybe. But she knew in her heart that it was too late. The sound of boots crunching on the gravel broke through her haze of grief, and Sarah looked up to see a tall figure approaching. His movements were slow and deliberate, the kind of movement that commanded attention. There was something about him that seemed different from the officers. His presence was overwhelming, yet calm. Sarah didn't know it yet. But this man was her father, Michael Thompson, a name that didn't mean much to the average person. But to those in the world of special forces, it meant everything. The world didn't know him as Michael Thompson. They knew him as Thompson, a Delta Force operative who had survived missions so dangerous that even his closest allies couldn't believe he had come back alive. He was a man who had been tested in the most brutal ways, who had seen the darkest parts of humanity, and who had emerged stronger than ever. The officers froze when they saw him. They didn't recognize him, but they felt it. The weight of his presence, the dangerous calm that hung around him like a thick fog. They had no idea who they were dealing with. "Enough," Michael said, his voice carrying through the night like a whip. The officers looked at him, confused but instinctively wary. "I said enough," Michael repeated, this time his voice hard as stone. One of the officers tried to stand taller to assert his authority. "Sir, this is a police matter." "We had to neutralize the threat." Michael didn't flinch. His eyes narrowed as he took a step closer. "You neutralized a dog," he said, his voice cold. "You shot a dog that was protecting its owner." "You don't get to make that call." "Not in my world," the officer's breath hitched. His gun trembled slightly in his grip. Michael took another step, his eyes not leaving the officers. "I don't know what you thought you were doing, but you've made a grave mistake. And now you'll pay for it." The officer looked around nervously, but the weight of Michael's words sank in. They hadn't realized what they were up against. Michael Thompson wasn't just some angry father. He wasn't just a man seeking justice for his dog. He was a force of nature, a man who had been to the edge of the world and back, and who had seen the kind of consequences that came from underestimating someone like him. Michael knelt beside Sarah, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him, her tear-filled eyes filled with confusion and disbelief. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He didn't say anything at first. He just reached out to stroke Max's fur, his fingers moving gently over the dog's head. Max's body was still warm, but the life in him had already started to fade. "I know, Sarah," Michael said quietly, his voice a low murmur meant only for her ears. "I know. We'll make sure they understand what they've done." The officers continued to stand there, their nerves frayed. They had no idea what was about to happen. They had no idea what kind of storm they had just unleashed. Michael stood again, his gaze sharp, his posture unyielding. "Get on the radio," he commanded the lead officer, his voice like steel. "You're going to call in backup. You're going to call in the higher-ups. And you're going to explain to them exactly who you've just killed." The officer didn't move for a moment, his hands shaking as he fumbled for his radio. Michael's eyes never left him. "Now," he ordered. The officer quickly complied, dialing into the radio with shaking hands. As he spoke, Michael's mind was already racing ahead. The wheels of his past were turning, setting into motion a series of events that would ensure this wasn't just another mistake swept under the rug. As the officer relayed the information, Michael turned to Sarah. "I'll make sure they never forget this, Sarah," he said, his voice quiet, but filled with a deadly promise. Sarah wiped her tears and nodded, a sense of relief washing over her. For the first time since Max had been shot, she felt like she wasn't alone. Her father was here, and with him, nothing, no one, could stand in their way.